Okay, we're on. There's a specific thing that I'll get to at the end for Andre. Andre Silva, you've been putting in your middle, Andre Lieta de Silva. I wasn't sure if that was really you all this time, bro. You've been around since almost day one since we started recording these. And I noticed that you had a message that you repeated more than once in order to get my attention. I'm sorry I didn't see it until like 2 days ago to realize that. So greetings to Brazil. We were just on the phone at like 4 a.m. this morning with Brazil. But getting back to, before I get to several things that have been said, I've had a really rough day. And this would have been normally a day when, about noontime, I would have known you're just not going to be in any shape to do it on tonight, on a Wednesday. And I would have called and let everybody know well in advance, don't set your schedule for tonight's meeting. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. And generally it was because I didn't want to inconvenience everybody to come all the way out here, only to find out that I wasn't going to do it. So today I decided I would, because that happened, the same exact thing happened 2 weeks ago. That's why we skipped a week, if you'll remember, week before last. I'm dealing with the same issues. I went to the hospital on Monday after I had woken up on Sunday with these same problems in my head. And went and was able, because of the great healthcare system. I'm very, very tired. Pardon me if you see me look like I'm a zombie. I apologize. Went to the hospital, and we talk about devilish functions all the time in the process of all this. Wednesday's such an important day to me because I feel this huge responsibility to you. And I don't do it lightheartedly, and I don't do it without a really serious sense of what I'm trying to accomplish. And when I can't feel the liquidity of energy and my the words aren't rolling off my tongue, it's very tough. It's very difficult for me to become frustrated. So, but again, this is part of life. I mean, my whole day's been weighed down with work. I mean, a lot of you are dealing with no work. You're all confined at home. You don't know where your next check, how you going to feed yourself. I'm not in that situation at this moment. In a very strange situation that finds me with an audience of people that are looking for encouragement. So the thing that I need to encourage you is to understand that when you're when you're really fighting to reveal your Buddha nature, the environment is going to try to stop you. Oh, yeah. And you are going to experience that in a way that's befuddling, because it would be like, I'm trying to do the very best good thing I can do. I'm trying to fulfill my mission. And yet, I'm not really being helped a lot by the circumstances that are manifesting in front of me. And we have to learn to fight through those things. Like I'm trying to fight through this tonight. And I'm hoping that rather than discouraging you, I'm fighting through it for you. Because this is really the point. As long as we don't let these devilish functions defeat us, we are not defeated. If we haven't stopped trying, we are not defeated. I'm going to go ahead and read to you, even though I don't really feel like it and don't want to. Because I know you really want to hear what I got to say here tonight. It's not me, it's President Cade talking about President Toda. And this is something that I have to share with you, as I told you from the very beginning. I've wanted to share this for years. I know why I'm meeting all this opposition. The devilish functions in the universe don't want me to let you guys know this stuff, and I know that most people don't have access to what I'm reading, and I don't know how else it would get out there if I didn't read it to you. So let me fulfill my mission for whatever that is, from the standpoint of imparting experience. I don't want to ever be here talking to you every time all cheery and happy, and it's bullshit. If I'm not in the life condition to expect cheerful and happy, I want you to know you don't have to be cheerful and happy and worry about the fact that Buddha nature's gone. Okay? Because right now, I'm in hell and expressing Buddhahood. That's exactly what's going on. All right? So let's get into the rest of the Garden of Life. I'm going to read it all the way through. I'm going to finish it. Last week, we stopped on page
420.
420, pardon me, right? Let me put my glasses back on here. Thank you. All right, 420. And I had just read you the Buddhist dictionary definition of for the fivefold comparison and threefold secret teaching. I'm going to read the threefold secret teaching last paragraph again because this is really the key. The third point corresponds of the threefold. I'm not going to go on point 1, point 2. That was last week. It's already been said. But to remind us again from where we're starting now on page 420. The third point corresponds to the comparison of the depths and the surface of the lifespan chapter of the sutra. The former indicating the Buddhism of sowing, and the latter the Buddhism of the harvest, which is how we view these things as Soka Gakkai members. These three levels of comparison reveal the ultimate teaching of Nichiren, or the Buddhism of sowing, as being Nam-myoho Renge-kyo of the three great secret laws, as clarified by Nichikan Shonin, High Priest of Nichiren Shoshu. So there's no real divorce between Nichiren Shoshu and Soka Gakkai until we get to 1990. All right? Nichikan used the term threefold secret teaching because the Buddhism of sowing, hidden in the threefold depths of the lifespan chapter, was unknown to the other Nichiren schools. And that's why we practice a different perspective than the other schools. Okay, continuing on page 420. Toda, second paragraph. Toda cleared his throat and remained silent for a while as if seeking the proper words. The audience remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Toda spoke with an excited emphasis. Now, if you'll remember, what he's talking about is the fact that he's going to take on other people that practice Nichiren Buddhism or practice Buddhism, and he's going to try and create and establish a process of dialogue that's going to be an ongoing component of his philosophy of life that he's trying to share with others as he's experienced it in his own life himself. He says, so this is all about talking about this, not debates necessarily, but they will be debates in essence, these clarifications of perspective. If comparison ends in mere comparison, like Nichiren Shu and Nichiren Shoshu, and they just talk about that's nothing. He said it will only be a quarrel, rife with shallow charges. An article so casually written would be easy to do, but it would also be meaningless. We are launching the Daibyaku Ringe to convince others to the truth of our beliefs. To do this, we must first point out the mistakes, weaknesses, and contradictions of others, and then use all of our persuasive powers to bring other people around to our way of thinking. This is the way we really should be doing Shakabuku. Simply to make claims is a means to quarrel, but not to develop persuasive power. The Daishonin's persuasive power, moreover, is not of the ordinary variety. Read his works carefully. His persuasive power is basically rooted in mercy. And when he talks about this rooted in mercy, this is to state the truth no matter what it is. Because when we say things that aren't the truth to try and sugarcoat it, we can obscure it to the point that people will never understand what we were really trying to say. He says, read his words carefully. His persuasive power is basically rooted in mercy. This is why he is so great. We are far from being able to do it his way, but we should make solid comparisons patiently, then pursue logic under the absoluteness of this teaching as it manifests itself clearly. Otherwise, we cannot convince the general public at all. President Toda, these are all in quotes, the most important thing in publishing the Daibyaku Renge is to be resolved to argue in a public forum to refute every other philosophy. That was the purpose and intent that President Toda was trying to establish with the recreation of the Soka Gakkai after the war. You should personally have such a resolution. That's President Toda saying that to you as well. So let's repeat that. The most important thing in publishing the Daibyaku Renge, which is the great white lotus, right, is to be resolved to argue in a public forum to refute every other philosophy. You should personally have such a resolution. Gone is the time when we would discuss matter only in terms comprehensible to those within our religion. Let me express an extreme opinion. The age in which logic special to religionists is satisfactory will surely come to an end. Kosen-Rufu will not be attained merely by refuting the heretical doctrines of other schools. More clearly stated, ours is an unprecedented war of thought, a confrontation between all extant systems of belief and the great Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin. And when he talks about the great Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin, he's talking about the Buddhism of sowing as he's perceived it and experienced it in his own life. All right? Not just chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This specific manner in which the Daishonin has encouraged us to practice as practitioners, not believers. All right? So, I got to go back again, because that's the only way I can make sure that these points are clearly understood. The important thing President Toda is saying is to be resolved to argue in a public forum. Now he's speaking to the staff of the Daibaku Renge, so he's saying this is the mission of this periodical, is to argue in a public forum to refute every other philosophy. Okay? You should personally have such a resolution. So why would he say you should personally have such a resolution? For the purpose of showing everybody that you know something and you're correct and they aren't correct? Why does he discuss this from you should personally have such a resolution?
Each one of us has to do it.
Well, the key is that the only way to eliminate this delusion that exists in the world is to persuasively shakabuku all those people that don't have the inherent nature of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo already seated in their life, to bring forth the life condition of Bodhisattva of the earth from those that have never chanted before. It's their original state, even though they have not chanted before, right? Everybody shares the original state. So the important thing is you can't eliminate this delusion that exists, that is creating all of the problems, these misunderstandings of the truth of what's creating circumstance, what creates karma, what is life. Am I okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, okay, again, continuing. More clearly stated, he's saying again that the Soka Gakkai's mission and goal is an unprecedented war of thought. Now that's a very powerful way to state it. War of thought. Why would he say it's a war of thought? What's significant about a war?
It's absolutely no other religion at this moment.
There's only one, a winner. There's a winner
Yes.
and there's a loser.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what he's basically saying. To be the winner when confronting all other philosophies, to be able to demonstrate the superiority of the Daishonin's teaching exactly as Nichiren qualified that it exists. He qualified that it's the ultimate teaching, not me, not President Ikeda, not President Toda. This was qualified by Nichiren. That was the fivefold comparison that we had just discussed. Nichikan has come along and said, hey, this is why Nichiren Shoshu is better than all the other Nichiren schools. That's really what that was all about. They don't even know about the threefold secret teaching. They don't even know what Buddhism of sowing actually is. That's why they've got images of Shakyamuni in their Butsudan says they chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. They've got their heads up their ass. That's the whole point. Okay? Now do you get it? Okay, so as his glasses kept sliding down on his nose, he would push them back with his hand. Taking a sharp look at the audience, he continued, you may be, again, I'm so sorry, folks. You may not be able to understand me instantly, he's saying. So what is he saying there? Just making that comment. What I'm stating to you is the absolute truth based on the depths of an experience of a life of practice or many years of practice. Okay? And now what he's saying, based on my depth and length of practice, you may not immediately understand what I'm saying. But you will in time, because you, like me, you will progress and grow. And these things will be awakened within you as well. They're the same truth. Okay? There's not going to be a new invention of truth. All right? You may not be able to understand me instantly. At least, however, I want you to bear in mind the great objective of the Daibyaku Renge magazine. Let us swing our gate wide open wide. And you can see the life condition has changed in me. Unbelievable. How about devoting some space to the so-called doctors of Riso University and others who are conversant with Buddhist history? Yes, the novelist Motofune recently said that the historic facts of Nichiji were brought to light only through the Pacific War. This topic might make interesting reading were it to be serialized. Toda's thoughts sounded a bit contrived even to the loyal editorial staff. For one, the novelist Motofune was a Nichiren Shoshu believer, but not a member of the Soka Gakkai. Moreover, the doctors at Riso University were not even believers in the teachings of Nichiren. The staff feared that they might possibly make irrational contentions and thereby dishonor the Daibyaku Renge. Toda immediately sensed their misgivings. With a smile on his face, he recovered his usual gentle expression. I'll try and bring mine back. He says, don't worry. Let them write on. Let them write on and on as they will. They have no spirit to debate against our position outright. They'll try to be theoretical. They'll try to be cerebral. He says, that's too bad. As things stand, their preconceptions remain unchallenged. Okay? He says, that's too bad. Let me start over. He says, don't worry. Let them write on and on as they will. They have no spirit to debate against our position outright. That's too bad. As things stand, their preconceptions remain unchallenged, and therefore no doubts are cast on their conventional ways of thinking. That's the whole function. We got to challenge these conventional ways of thinking to wake up people to the practice, the correct practice of Nichiren's teachings. He says, these seemingly respectable scholars will apply their whole stock of knowledge to word-by-word interpretations of Buddhism, mental masturbation, since they cherish no fundamental Buddhist ideals. They are not trying to create Kosen Rufu.
Right.
All right? Let alone any real personal conviction. This is all theoretical mind candy. I know something you don't know. Their thinking is confused. What we have to do is to provide an opportunity for discussion with others. Without a battlefield, there can be no war of words. There is nothing more to discuss regarding the editorial policy. Now, carry it out quickly. Decide on your division of labor and negotiate with the writers right away. The page plan for the inaugural issue of the Daibyaku Renge was decided upon with great ease and none too soon. To the editorial staff who had been worried for 3 long months, Toda's decision was a revitalizing inspiration. Pardon me. Bottom of page 421. The once withering great white lotus blossom, the Daibyaku Renge, was thus instantly brought back to life. Toda remained faithful to the editorial plan he himself had devised, discarding all the religionists' interpretations of Buddhism. Now, discarding all the religionists' interpretations of Buddhism. What does that say to you then? He's talking about his own philosophy. I mean, the priesthood would have been religionists, I believe, or people that spoke of religion outside. I don't know. Discarding all the religionists' interpretations of Buddhism, he prepared to make his own first appeal to the world with the publication of his work, The Philosophy of Life, which might as well be called the jewel of his conviction, the unshakable confidence nurtured through the first half of his life. Okay, so this realization that he's sharing with others didn't come in the first 3 years of his practice or the first 5 years of his practice or the first any kind of his practice. It was about the right amount of time that was necessary for him to advance for the karma that he had. Okay? At that time, he cherished an unyielding conviction in what he perceived to be the reality of life. At this point in time, he's talking about, okay? All right? By that time, an unshakable confidence nurtured through the first half of his life. At the time, he cherished an unyielding conviction in what he perceived to be the reality of life. By life, he did not refer to the biological or medical definition of the phenomena, nor was his concept limited to life in this existence alone, subject to birth and death. And it was far removed from any superstitious beliefs in a disembodied soul, like Western philosophy. His, he knew, to be the obvious reality of life itself, as he had perceived it in that prison cell. With the documentary evidence that he had gleaned from the Lotus Sutra, he was able to believe that the real existence of life spanned the three existences of life, past, present, and future. Josei Toda further advanced his thinking, ending with a profound and indelible impression of the reality of life by reading Nichiren Daishonin's The Opening of the Eyes, The Selection of Time, The Record of the Orally Transmitted Teachings, Reka, and other theses that reveal life's truth more profoundly and fundamentally than Shakyamuni ever did. His awakening during his prison days revealed the truth as if perfectly reflected in a spotless mirror. Everybody with me? I don't have to reread that, right? That was pretty clear. And again, these same goshos, these same things are the same things we've been reading over and over and over and over again. His hesitation sprang only from the realization of how difficult it would be to impart his awakening to others. This was why he found himself repeating his individual lectures on the Lotus Sutra, and on each occasion having to recognize the limitations of his audience's understanding. Because there's no way for everybody that's listening to what I'm saying right now to understand it exactly the same way everyone else is understanding what I'm saying right now. Yeah. This is the truth of life, okay? So you have to understand and incorporate that into how you perceive the teaching and how you perceive what you're experiencing as you go along with qualifying this all the way to the last moment of your life. That's the key. He says, his hesitation sprang only from the realization of how difficult it would be to impart his awakening to others. This was why he found himself repeating his individual lectures on the Lotus Sutra, and on each occasion having to recognize the limitations of his audience's understanding. Going on to the chapter, The Three Existences of Life, as he's writing this, the philosophy of life, this is he imagined the contemptuous faces. I like this. Going on to the chapter The Three Existences of Life, he imagined the contemptuous faces of his contemporary intellectuals sneering self-complacently at his ideas. So he continued to write in a challenging manner. Many intellectuals may deny the three existences of life with a sneer, calling it mere superstition. Okay? What are the three existences of life? Past, present, and future, right? That's what we're talking about. He says, I can only laugh at their thoughtlessness because they neglect to make a scientific approach to their own lives. How can science exist without the law of cause and effect? He asks. Cause and effect are found in all phenomena of the universe. Yes. It is a mere explanation of fact to say that the birth of a being is the result of combining a sperm, cell, and ovum. That is not a drastically profound thought to go into the biology of conception. He goes, those who complacently claim the casual advent of life into this world and then its subsequent extinction by death as if mere bubbles, while all other phenomena are ruled by the law of cause and effect, are too indifferent to their own lives. In other words, you see science, but you don't see your life in the same manner. He says, the real phenomena of life remain inexplicable and incomprehensible to even the greatest development of natural science. There are various living things before our eyes: human beings, cats, dogs, tigers, and even tall cedar trees. Are their lives identical, or are they different? What is the relationship among them? When Toda set out to reveal What Toda set out to reveal was not that modern intellectuals lacked correct knowledge about religion, but that they were ignorant and indifferent about their own lives. To compound matters, however, he was lost in meditation in trying to figure out how to clarify the three existences of life, and further to explain the eternity of existence, which has no beginning and no end. Upon reaching this point in his thinking, he changed the title of the chapter to Eternity of Life. Instead of from the three existences of life, he changed the title of the chapter to Eternity of Life. He then proceeded to write about the duration of life. After explaining two passages from the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which reveal Shakyamuni's view of eternal life, he intended to write about the reality of life based upon the ultimate doctrine of Nichiren Daishonin as expounded in his writings, the ultimate teachings affirmed by all Buddhas of past, present, and future, the entity of the mystic law on the 10 worlds, as well as the record of the orally transmitted teachings. And I always get this grin on my face. I'm sorry, because these are all my favorite goshos. It's like very cool. After explaining the two passages from the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which reveals Shakyamuni's view of eternal life, he intended to write about the reality of life based on the ultimate doctrine of Nichiren Daishonin as expounded in his writings, the ultimate teaching affirmed by all Buddhas of past, present, and future, the entity of the mystic law on the 10 worlds, as well as the record of the orally transmitted teachings. His goal was to proceed to the truth that the reality of life is possessed of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, but he soon realized the necessity of drawing a conclusion about the eternity of life. I fear that I may disgrace the source, but I must dare to expound something of eternal life. And I'm so glad he did, because he helped form my conception of that I still rely on. He says, pardon me. Okay. Life exists simultaneously with the universe. Okay? There's no separation. It did not exist before, nor did it casually appear after the universe came in being. Neither was it created by anyone. The universe itself is life. It is a mistaken view to think that life is the possession of the earth only. All we are seeking to do is to grasp the reality of our mystic life. Blessed as we are by the Daishonin's boundless mercy, blessed as we are by the Daishonin's boundless mercy, and to devote ourselves to the Gohonzon, the entity of attaining Buddhahood in this lifetime, and the actual 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. Now that was a very profound paragraph. I'm going to reread it and break it down a little bit. Okay, he says, let me go. His goal was to proceed to the truth that the reality of life is possessed of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, which would be saying what? He would say that his goal was to proceed to the truth that the reality of life is that we all inherently possess the Buddha nature. Okay? Already possess the Buddha nature. Okay? But he soon realized the necessity of drawing a conclusion about the eternity of life, because that eternity of life is the only thing that accurately describes that Buddha nature. That Buddha nature is the original state. Buddhahood is the original state. It's the wisdom of the truth. Okay, so he says, I fear I may disgrace the source, but I must dare to expound something of eternal life. So then he goes into this again. He says, life exists simultaneously with the universe. So it's not life and the universe, because what is life? What life is existence, correct? There are 3 realms of existence, right? We're not talking about the 3 existences. I'm not talking about past, present, and future. What I'm talking about is what? The 3 realms.
Okay.
What are the 3 realms? The person.
Yep.
The person, but the person never appears by itself. So.
Yep. Manifest body.
No.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
Realm of the person.
Realm of the person.
Persons, and the environment. Okay, so what is the universe in reality? And the reality that all 3 of those things are inseparable. Okay? The environment appears first in order to make way for the living entities to occupy.
Right.
Okay? But the environment didn't suddenly manifest out of nothingness
Right.
in a complete form, right?
Right.
Okay. So is there any separation between life and the environment that it lives in? No. So if that's what he's saying. The life exists simultaneously with the universe. The universe itself is life. There is no life in the absence of the universe. And in reality, there's no universe in the absence of life. Because the universe is functioning as the environment of the three realms and is providing the home of the person and the persons, the other two realms. You get it?
Yeah.
Okay, so life exists simultaneously with the universe. So that way, this is a philosophy that's saying you're not separated from anything, and you can't disrespect anything as being separated from you. Right. Nothing's expendable, and nothing is better or less. Okay? This is the grand equality. Okay? Life exists simultaneously with the universe. It did not exist before, because they're the same thing. Nor did it casually appear after the universe came into being, because it was already there from the very beginning. It didn't appear later. Neither was it created by anyone. The universe is life itself. It is a mistaken view to think that life is the possession of the earth only. He's qualifying this. He's qualifying this in the 50s. Okay? All we are seeking to do is to grasp the reality of our mystic life. Our mystic life is the Gohonzon that exists in our life. Do you understand? That's the true Gohonzon. The real Gohonzon is the reality of our mystic life that is in all lives. Blessed are we as the Daishonin's boundless mercy to reveal this truth to us. But as his original disciples, we're also bound by the vow that lets us to perceive and understand this in this lifetime, to the responsibility that we must propagate this teaching for the sake of the others that don't know it yet.
Yes.
He says, and to devote ourselves to the Gohonzon. Now, when we devote ourselves to the Gohonzon, what are we devoting ourselves to? We're devoting ourselves to the original state. We're devoting ourselves to the mystic law. It's the same thing. The entity of the attainment of Buddhahood in this lifetime. It's all the same thing. And the actual 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. So what's actual 3,000 realms? What is that? That's called actual Ichinen Sanzen. What's the difference between actual Ichinen Sanzen and theoretical Ichinen Sanzen? One's an understanding of the things that create Buddhahood. The other's actually being the Buddha in your present form. Actual Ichinen Sanzen mean you've crossed over from understanding it to living it. Okay?
It sounded so cool.
Boy, it ain't easy.
It's not easy.
Philosophers, by the way, you see what I have written here. Ha! Philosophers prior to Toda had, of course, abstractly speculated on the reality of life and had done so in great detail. But Toda's wish was quite different from their intent. He wanted to enable each individual. He wanted for you to have the ability to draw forth this wisdom that exists in you. It has nothing to do with your freaking IQ. It has nothing to do with your sex. It has nothing to do with where you were born or how old you are. This is available universally to everybody. This is pretty cool stuff.
Yes.
He wanted each individual to realize in actuality, not theoretically, in actuality. Now, what does that mean? That means they're manifesting actual proof in their daily life that validates to them that what they're doing and reading and understanding is true, so that they can grow in the depth of that understanding to be able to share it with others in a more meaningful way. And at the same time, nobody can fucking give them, nobody can give them any shit because they always win. Mm-hmm. They're showing actual proof even to the people that disbelieve.
Yes.
Okay, even to the slanderers. Eat my dust. He wanted to enable each individual. Excuse me for screwing up there, guys. I'm tired. I told you sometimes that slips out. He wanted to enable each individual to realize, and I hope there were no children that heard me speak like that. I'm a little embarrassed. He wanted to enable each individual to realize in actuality the dignity and eternity of their lives, thus helping them reveal a great life force, the great life force of the Buddha that they are in their present form. Page 424. In writing up to this point, Toda soon realized that he had to refute the deeply rooted common sense view of modern biology. His pen raced along the paper with ever-increasing speed. Some may deny my assertion of eternal life, maintaining that man and animals evolved from the cell division of amoebas. If this is so, I would like to counter-question them about how the amoebas came into being and from whence they came after the molten earth cooled off. Be it this earth or another planet, amoebas will appear if conditions are right for their existence. Just as all living things do, they appear in the environments as the environments develop to the point that they can sustain them. If the soil and climate are suitable for the growth of non-flowering plants, they will proliferate. I do not deny evolutionary development, but since the universe is life itself, since the universe itself is life, a primitive form of life will appear whenever conditions are right. Because there's never a separation between the two. It is therefore no miracle whatsoever that the human race may have lived on another planet thousands or billions of years ago, or that it now exists prospering on Earth. Nor can I agree with that view of life which contends that life as we know it originated from protein or some other type of matter at a certain period in time. This is because life is an eternal existence, as is the universe. It took Toda. This is all making sense, isn't it? Give me a minute. Just a second. Thank you, Collins. It took Toda about a week to write this point for the philosophy of life. A busy man, he could not work on his writing every night. In the daytime, he had to struggle in his office. The economic situation of the time. Now again, oh God, guys, there's a reason I'm reading this. This is freaking me out. I didn't plan on reading this. I had wanted to read this, but I didn't know. I wasn't remembering that it was correlating to. Listen to what's going to be happening. I probably really need to read the whole thing. This is really very profoundly poignant to this moment.
Right.
It took Toda about a week to write this point for the philosophy of life. A busy man, he could not work on his writing every night. In the daytime, he had to struggle in his office, like all of us. The economic situation of the time did not permit him the slightest chance to slack off in his publishing business. It was next to impossible for him to absent himself from his office or even arrive late. In the evening, he had to give guidance to members living in various circumstances. This is so hard. Their problems were too serious for him to ignore. His thrice weekly lectures continued regularly. He would this is why I'm reading this now. He would not let himself skip these, no matter what. He made a point of opening his lectures at 6 o'clock in the evening and closing them at 7:30. Even so, he faced earnest questions, put to him one after another. One evening he pleaded, "Let's break it off for tonight, okay? Let me go now. I'm going to go home for a drink, but I'm not going home for a drink, but to work on a great thesis. At any rate, I'm going. I don't know when I can finish it. The editorial staff of the Daibyaku Inge is hounding me for the manuscript, which is the only article not yet completed. This is more than I can bear. Their hounding, however, is justified because I'm already 2 days late for their deadline." Laughing at all this, Toda for the first time disclosed the pain and worry he had experienced for the past several days. Pain and worry? There you go. You got some. He had some. Don't mean shit. It comes with this turf. But it only made for an interesting and funny story. Innocent laughter, because they don't understand what he's really experiencing and feeling inside. He's talking about how hard it is, and everybody's going, yeah. They don't know. He won't tell them. Innocent laughter arose in response. Anyway, I'm leaving, Toda said as he rose to depart. As he reached the stairway, loud applause burst forth unexpectedly behind him. Tonight, by all means, I will finish my thesis, he resolved in his heart. Exiting the building, Toda hurried along the street. It was already past 9 o'clock by the time he opened the window of his study and plopped himself into the seat of his desk. He was up to the final chapter, the continuation of life. Given that life is eternal, this is in quotation, pardon me. He was up to the final chapter, the continuation of life. Given that life is eternal, in what condition does it endure? This was a real problem to explain. Life in this world is easy to explain, but what does it become after death? This posed his greatest challenge so far. Calling forth in his mind all the normal doubts about life and death, he continued to write on the question. But it was, after all, a theory that lacked any actual proof. As for the most popular concept, that life is continued by posterity. Now, this is ancestor worship in Japan, right? This is Shintoism, right? So, as for the most popular concept, which was this ancestor worship in Japan, that life is continued by posterity, this was totally absurd. And do you understand that concept? That your ancestors live on in you. That the continuum of the life of an individual is in his offspring. Okay? In that manner, he lives on. Okay? And he says, if one's life were to be transferred to one's son, it would exist not only for himself, but also in his son. If his son were to die without heirs, what would become of the life he possessed? If all posterity were wiped out, life could certainly not be considered eternal in this viewpoint. A life that would perish if the earth were destroyed could not be called eternal in any sense of the word. At the thought of this, the words of Japanese novelist Shogyu Takayama came to mind. A great man's works will be left to later generations, and he lives on in those works. Was he correct? If so, only the great would live on, and if the lives of ordinary people as well as those of dogs and cats would not in the least bit be eternal. Eternal life should hold universal validity. Now, I love this perspective that President Toda's put out there, because what did he just say? That's different than everything else I've ever heard in Western philosophy. What did he just include with the people there? When he talked about life, did he only talk about human beings? Let me read it again. At the thought of this, the words of the Japanese novelist Shogyu Takayama came to life. A great man's works will be left to later generations, and he lives on in those works. Was he correct? If so, only the great would live on, and the lives of ordinary people, as well as those of cats and dogs, would not in the least be eternal. Eternal life should hold universal validity. So when he qualifies that universal validity, he's qualifying all living things. He's not saying, like heaven where, you understand what I'm saying? This is not like other religions where there's a special place for the living beings, but the plants, the animals, nothing else lives on. Nothing else reaches this paradise. This world of Buddhahood, this Buddha land is experienced by all of its inhabitants, all the things that live in it, all the plants, all the trees, all the animals, everything. This is what President Toda is expressing here. It is not a continuation, it is not a continuation of life when only a person's fame is left behind. It is no more than the memory of a deceased person. Then what of the common view of the eternal soul? It is hard to imagine even a child believing that a soul emerges from the body and swims eternally in the ethereal heavens. It is absurd to think so, and Shakyamuni thoroughly refuted this in the Nirvana Sutra. He even defined it as a kind of heresy. Okay, so from the perspective of Buddhism, to think you have a soul is absolutely incorrect. Because it goes back to Shakyamuni to say, no, you ain't got no soul. You ain't got no permanent existence that is always remanifest as that same existence. In Buddhism, too, there is no problem more difficult than that of life after death, since it requires the highest level of understanding in Buddhism. Even if life after death is correctly expounded, it may only be misunderstood or distorted by the general public. Josei Toda concluded that the best thing for him to do was to approach the subject in the simplest manner possible using common sense. He therefore completely abandoned the device of using extensive quotations from the Sutra and the Gosho, which he had already prepared. He decided to write only what was unassailable and left no room for doubt by anyone. In the verse portion of the lifespan chapter, there is a passage that reads, Hobingen Nehan, meaning that death is but an expedient means. For example, sleeping is but a means compared with a person's daily objective to do productive work. It would seem that since people were meant to be active, they would need no sleep. But in truth, without sleep, they cannot dispel their fatigue or work vigorously. Likewise, when people become old or ill or find their bodies going to ruin, they have no alternative but to restore their youthfulness through the means of death. He thus attempted to continue his explanation of life after death by elucidating the reality of life through the 10 worlds, and he intended to expound in detail the principle of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life as the underpinnings of life's functioning, and to do so through citing the object of devotion for observing the mind. He feared, however, that this might deviate from his original intention of presenting this thesis in as simple a manner as possible, calling upon the public's most generally accepted fund of knowledge. So he had to stop writing, only noting, I will make a more detailed explanation at another time. He was wondering what examples would best explain how life continues after death, or indeed how to show it does so. Consequently, he would pause from his writing frequently and smoke cigarettes one after another. When he reached this point in his exposition, he decided to describe the mysterious function of the mind. The mind, which is a phenomena arising from life's very functioning, has a doubt-free and sure existence that at times feels delight and at other times sadness. He explained, a person may feel delight, but with time this feeling passes. It does not necessarily go away, but you cannot relocate it since it melts back into the mind itself. Several hours or several days later, however, the same feeling of delight may arise. In another example, suppose someone is grief-stricken over something. Several hours or days later, as he recalls the happening, the same grief may envelop him. People may say that he renews his sad feelings by himself, but there is certainly a continuation of the earlier and later griefs, while at the same time there is no visible link between them. Was he talking about the mind, right? He's saying similar phenomena occur when we sleep each night. The mind, so he's really trying to qualify consciousness versus your brain activity. Okay, consciousness is that Buddha nature. Okay, brain activities from this lifetime. This brain cells is the development. It's what education, whatever. Okay. Similar phenomena occur when we sleep each night. The mind or consciousness does not exist while a person is asleep. You can't think and tell yourself what to do while you're sleeping, right? You can't get up and make a cup of coffee while you're sleeping, okay? Right. But the moment one awakens, his or her mind begins its activities again. Mm-hmm. Thus, we can say that there is no mind while one is sleeping, but there is a mind while one is awake. Which is true to say, that there is a mind or there is not a mind? If we choose to say that it exists, we cannot always find it. In contrast, if we choose to say that it does not exist, suddenly it appears. He broke off for a smoke. He was certain that he had somewhat casually but solidly presented the Buddhist view of non-substantiality. neither existence nor non-existence, which is generally considered the most abstruse, the most abstruse issue in Buddhism concerning Buddhist views of existence and non-existence. He felt satisfied. Western philosophy classifies everything into existence and non-existence, two extremes. It is devoid of ideas such as non-substantiality or the middle way. Life cannot be comprehended properly, however, without the concept of non-substantiality, which is neither existence nor non-existence. The mystic view of non-substantiality reveals that the very wonder, the mystic view of non-substantiality reveals that very wonder, the continuation of life. Because this is where we go in between manifest existences. Toda reached his conclusion. As I mentioned before, the universe itself is life. Suppose we die. After death, life is fused into the great life of the universe and can be found nowhere. Just as there is no connection between moments of grief or moments of delight. Or as there is no mind while one is asleep. For a thing called a soul to be navigating the heavens is not a valid theory. Even if life melts into the great universe, it does not always feel repose, just as sleep is not always necessarily restful. While we may sleep, some find peace. Others are tortured by bad dreams, and others about their light slumber, like me. Since there is no way to prove life after death scientifically, Toda realized that his thesis might be considered mere hypothesis. Through his own experience, however, he was well aware that those who believed faithfully in the premise of his thesis and who practiced Buddhism earnestly had been able to change their destinies and achieve their proof in their attainment of Buddhahood. Still, he was profoundly convinced that the time would doubtless come when his hypothesis would be established as truth. So what did that just say? Since there's no way to prove life after death scientifically, Toda realized that his thesis, the philosophy of life, which is he's doing as a layperson, right? He's not doing it as a Nichiren Shoshu high priest or anything, right? He's not doing it as a well-known philosophical writer or anything.
Right.
He's saying, so it could be considered as mere hypothesis. Do you know what hypothesis is? Just a guess, just a theory, all right? Through his own experience, however, he was well aware of that those who believe faithfully in the premise of his thesis, in other words, he became well aware that the people that he had been encouraging to practice in this manner, that he had understood from President Makaguchi and then refined even further through his own experience in prison. As he came out, he saw practicing people that practiced Buddhism this way, chanted Daimoku, did Gongyo, did Shakabuku, had a sense of mission for Kosen Rufu. All the things, none of that was going on in Nichiren Shoshu. The priesthood was not trying to instigate any of that kind of stuff. You know, the thought of saving society, saving the world, establishing the correct teaching, all these things were abstract theory, that wasn't something the priesthood pressed. The Soka Gakkai and Toda is who pressed the actualization of this. All right, and so he's saying, he was well aware that those who believe faithfully in the premise of his thesis, what he was doing was working for other people too, and who practiced Buddhism earnestly had been able to change their destinies. They all got benefits like he did, and had been able to achieve proof of their attainment of Buddhahood in their present form. Still, he was profoundly convinced that the time would doubtless come when his hypothesis would be established as truth. You want me to finish it? I can finish it, right?
Yes.
All right. The Buddhist view of the universe, established 3,000 years ago, is being proven scientifically every day by modern astronomers, although they are unaware that it is proof of Buddhism as such. And then that's absolutely the truth. And I'll stop there. That is so cool. Modern science is just proving this is all nailed. Similarly, the truth of Josei Toda's philosophy of life will also be proclaimed in the future. That's President Ikeda's conviction, that President Toda's understanding and what he actually instigated as a perception, he'll get full credit for it at some point. It is a modern trend in the world that one cannot overlook the lucid intention that derives from what is known as the wisdom of the East. It is regrettable that the world's intellectuals are not even aware that the core of this wisdom lies in the Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin. Even if they chance upon it, they refuse to believe it. It is as if humankind is staring vapidly into the air, standing upon the shore of a deep lake of unhappiness, one that extends far off into the endless future. With a perplexed heart, Toda gazed at this visage of humankind living foolishly in the modern age. What he truly desired most of all was to share his superb, sharp, and truthful intuition with those stalemated in life. Those stalemated in life. What comes when you're stalemated in life usually? Your seeking spirit is activated to find out why the hell you're stalemated. Okay? That's what this is. This is people saying, I can't figure out why the hell things are the way they are. And I want to know what's going on. I want to change. Okay? That's change is the opposite of stalemate. He wrote the following as the natural conclusion of his article. This is from President Toda. The question of how people's lives melt into the universe after death can be grasped spontaneously once you reach the heart of Buddhism by studying the Buddha Sutras. A life in the state of death can resume its visible manifestation in this world when its rebirth is caused by some unknown circumstance or by karmic relationship. But just as one continues to be who he was the previous night once he awakens in the morning, the newborn life must maintain and continue the prescribed life of its former existence as an unavoidable effect of its past acts. Do you understand what that just said? Okay, let me continue. Thus, because he'll finish it. Thus, just as one sleeps and awakens and sleeps, a person lives and dies and lives, maintaining the eternity of life. Now, do you understand what he was saying? So he's saying, your life comes to an end, and you went through birth, old age, sickness, and death. Death was the point in time that you left the manifest form that you were in while you were a temporary gathering of the five components. Okay, now you've gone, those temporary five, they didn't stay gathered as a soul. They just did whatever they do and diffuse. But you have written additional copy into the story of life that is the existence that you reveal, right? Through the causes you've made. Right. The simultaneity of cause and effect. In each moment, you lived out an effect, and in that moment, you made a freaking cause as well. Yes. Okay? You never get to escape those causes that you make. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, the things that you're manifesting as the previous effects are all pushing you forward as a source of fortune. You've created that fortune yourself. That's why your life progresses forward. That's why you have the ability to make distinctions and encourage others. It's nothing more than, it's a great reward, but it's not one that is like, we're finished now. Okay? It's not that way. So he says, thus, just as one sleeps and awakens and sleeps, a person lives and dies and lives, maintaining the eternity of life, and their karma begins where it left off. How they're born, where they're born, who are their parents, what sex are they? Every freaking thing is going to be based on where they left off that finish point. Because during the course of life, they've been living out effects and making new causes too, right? So no two lives are the same. Right. You got a different recipe each time. You've added to the recipe each time. You either subtracted some good shit or you added some good shit. Or you didn't do shit. Okay? That's it. All right? So the Philosophy of Life manuscript numbered no more than 30 pages. In reality, however, its easy-to-read style presented many fresh theories and principles. More recently, books have appeared with doctrines similar to the ones contained in Toda's work, but they are all merely idealism. In his day, there was no one else who so distinctly probed the question of life and death. Toda had no idea as to how his thesis, completed in the middle of the night, 2 days past deadline, in the midst of a busy schedule, might be evaluated in the philosophical world of the future, nor could he have known how remarkable an influence it would have on all humanity. Because that is the Soka philosophy, people!
Yes.
At the time, he was no doubt delighted at having fulfilled his responsibility for the first issue of the Daibyaku Renge by finishing his most difficult thesis. Alone, he quietly drank the golden-colored sake he had poured into a glass. How refreshing it was the air of that May night. Today, many people are reading the philosophy of life, and even some intellectuals, though few in number, are beginning to realize its profound value. One may safely say that they are coming to realize that this brief thesis, simple yet highly persuasive and profound in context, is destined to guide the age at some near future date. They have begun to foresee the tremendous influence the article will have on the world for centuries to come, just as René Descartes' discourse on method proved to be the root of the giant tree which grew the thick boughs and luxuriant leaves of modern philosophy, of which Descartes is rightfully the father. If one were to compare the thesis of Descartes and Toda, one would detect a self-evident common feature to both. It is an amazing clarity in their conceptualization, which is so superb that it will only appear in this human world once every several hundred years. Both begin by relating their own daily experiences in commonplace words and then go on to their inspired conclusions. These two works were separated by several hundred years, but they prepared a foundation of imperishable philosophical truth. I do not say this just to enhance the honor of my deceased mentor, President Cato writes. If one were to take a cool view of everything from the perspective of an objective third party, there is a reason for thinking this way. Those who read these two works will feel as if their eyes have been opened. In other words, they will be surprised to find that there is a clear distinction between their views of the world before and after reading them. This will, in consequence, give rise to a completely new mental outlook, provided the reader does not embrace distorted views or harbor ill feelings. In other words, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to cop an attitude rather than being open to try to perceive the truth as being shared. He said, some people may laugh at this notion, some people may laugh off this notion as being overstated, but nevertheless, I have this to say. The passage of time will purify the turbidity of existing modern philosophy, and then we will see the rise of this philosophy of life without fail. As for the differences between the philosophy of life and discourse on method by Descartes, José Toda proclaimed that life itself was the foundation of all living beings in the universe, sentient and insentient. Through the eternal duration of past, present, and future, while Descartes was absolutely convinced that reason, which could also be called consciousness, is the tie that binds all human beings from birth. Toda maintained that the universal law of life was the determining factor in each individual's happiness and unhappiness, and he applied it himself to the salvation of humanity. Descartes, in contrast, drew the conclusion that the pursuit of truth lies in learning only through the revelation of reason. Descartes began by doubting all existing learning and knowledge and strove diligently for the establishment of a totally new philosophy, basing its foundation on what would be called universal reason. The substantial differences in the doctrine of these two men can be traced to the times in which they were born, the society in which they lived, and the individual characters they possessed. I think, moreover, that they distinguished themselves by manifesting subtle and hard-to-explain truths through their daily experiences and the profundity of their various studies in a direct, powerful, and unique manner. This made their works elaborate as they were, even more persuasive. Descartes made his thoughts public when he became convinced that his famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," was an exact and unquestionable truth. He then made this his first principle of his philosophy and used it to give direct evidence of the existence of reason in Part 4 of his Discourse on Method. To reach the point of his conclusion, he was forced, however, to take a long written journey describing his spiritual pilgrimage in parts 1 through 3. This is similar to Josei Toda's method. To prepare the conceptual foundation, Toda had to start by relating his mystical experiences in his first chapter, The Mystery of Human Life, in his complete work, The Philosophy of Life. Unlike Toda, who was a busy man of action, Descartes no doubt had plenty of free time, and they both died in their 50s, by the way. Naturally, his preparatory narrative is much longer. Descartes' inward journey ended at the shrine of God-given reason. Josei Toda was convinced of the absolute existence of life as revealed in Buddhism and was the first to expound its clarity. At the base of Descartes' eye, Toda saw life. Following the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin and putting the doctrine into assiduous practice, despite unbearable hardships, Toda was able to reach the enlightenment that is known as the oneness of the Buddha and the common mortal, attainment of Buddhahood in your present form. He thus became awakened to the truth of life. At that time, he became convinced that this provided the only practical and fundamental method for alleviating the misery of the world. The purpose of this type of practice, he felt, lies for the achievement of Kosarufu. Therefore, for Toda, practice was the complete equivalent of meditation, or, from another perspective, meditation was the complete equivalent of practice. I wish to call the reader's attention to the term complete equivalent. Herein lies the secret as to why, when one remembers Josei Toda, there flashes in the mind a totally new image of a modern philosopher and religious leader. I am of the opinion that the philosophies of Josei Toda and René Descartes heralded the birth of a new philosophy, although they differ from each other in the meaning of their thought systems. Here is a history of modern men. So again, let me go to the top. He says, the purpose of this type of practice, he felt, lies in working for the achievement of Kosarufu. Okay, that's the difference between Descartes. Descartes might as well have been a Pratyeka Buddha. To understand consciousness, to understand reason, to understand the mind, that was all understand yourself, the individual. It wasn't predicated on salvation of anything else. And in fact, it already qualified that there were limitations based on intellect. All right? So the purpose of this type of practice, he felt, lies in working for the achievement of Kosarufu. Let me qualify this again, because this is the important thing about when you practice what makes benefit and what leads to Buddhahood versus what leads to time in the organization and ultimately a lack of the ultimate purpose of why you started practicing. Because it should be to attain Buddhahood in the present form, not to get a bunch of benefits. Let me go back to page 430. Following the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin and putting the doctrine into assiduous practice. Now what does that mean? Putting the doctrine into assiduous practice means that every day you never let up. It is the focus of your life. All right? Despite unbearable hardships, Toda was able to reach the enlightenment. Okay, so he was able to attain Buddhahood in his present form is what that sentence is trying to say. Through what? How did he attain Buddhahood in his present form? By putting the doctrines into assiduous practice, which is exactly what you do, exactly what I do. That's what we all do. Okay? That's how he did it. That's why he is the person that established this practice. Not Nichiren and Shoshu. The practice that we practice was established by Josei Toda. Okay? Toda was able to reach the enlightenment that is known as the oneness of the Buddha and common world. He thus became awakened to the truth of life. He understood the truth of the Daishonin's teachings from the correct perspective as it had been passed down through Nichiren Shoshu and Nichikan Shonin. At the same time, he became convinced that thus provided the only practical and fundamental method for alleviating the mystery of the world. Okay, the purpose of this type of practice, the type of practice that he was now revealing and inspiring or trying to lead other people to embrace as a part of their daily functional reality of Nichiren, of chanting, okay, lies in working for the achievement of Kosarufu. So do you understand that that's the point? All right. Therefore, for Toda, practice was the complete equivalent of meditation, or from another perspective, meditation was the complete equivalent of practice. Because don't forget, seated meditation has been the big thing, or invocation of Amida's name. I mean, this is all about the Daishonin trying to qualify that when we're chanting Daimoku, this is the appropriate meditation, process of meditation for the latter day. But Toda's saying it's not just chanting Daimoku, it's living the life of the Buddha as well. It's living the life that the Daishonin lived. Okay? And that's why we have to study Dushakabuku and attain Buddhahood in our present form. All right? Now, he says, here is a history of modern man. The modern age began with the Renaissance, after the Dark Ages, right? A revival of humanity reflected in the fact that humankind once again became animated and powerful in the workings of society. Once rendered into obscurity during the time of medieval society, humankind came to realize that a single life is as valuable as that of the entire earth. Strong voices raised in pursuit of human freedom, equality, and dignity eventually incited widespread social revolution. At the same time, the scientific revolution resulted in the differentiation and specialization of studies on the human being until man began to lose his self-identity. This is what happened to civilized society as the 19th century passed into the 20th century. Never thought about it that way until I read it this year. As people became more and more conscious of their lost humanity and their feelings of isolation and estrangement, they will be delighted to see arising from behind the normal patterns of human society the distinct figure of life. As people become more and more conscious of their lost humanity and their feelings of isolation and estrangement, they will be delighted to see arising from behind the normal patterns of human society the distinct figure of life. 50 years into the 20th century, biologists in concert began to challenge the mystery of life. This was represented by the appearance of biochemists as a group after the close of World War II. In the summer of 1967, the International Congress of Biochemistry was held in Japan, attended by more than 5,000 biochemists from around the world. They seemed to be dreaming of the possibility of creating life, even while making test tube cultures or viewing biological activities through the microscope. It is a matter to be welcomed that humankind's interest in life has been greatly enhanced. Even if substances such as deoxyribonucleic acid. Yeah, it's a mouthful. I haven't said it since high school. DNA! Even if substances such as DNA are discovered through efforts to reveal the truth of life from a material standpoint, it is hardly imaginable that the mystery of life can be solved so easily. Where did life come from and where will it go? The answer will be found neither in the test tube nor in the microscope. In the final analysis, the substance of life exists within us. Therefore, to restore human self-identity, emphasis should be placed on the elucidation of life itself. Toda's The Philosophy of Life was the declaration of a new era of life, and the time will come when its import will be recognized. With the advent of the 21st century, various kinds of experiments concerning life will be repeated one after another, arousing great discussion and advancing various hypotheses. With the scientific approach of some of the discussions may even come to prove the validity of parts of Toda's thesis. It will be at such a time, I am convinced, that the philosophy of life will take on a brilliant splendor across the globe. When a person is driven into a blind alley in search of the truth of life, he will find the philosophy of life to be the home to which he is destined to return, and he will come to enjoy immense happiness. Though Descartes was a priceless jewel for the dawn of modern civilization, his mission has already been fulfilled. Now that the question of life has reasserted itself in society, the philosophy of life will become a beacon of hope for the transformation of human society while the attainment of Kosurufu is pursued. The first issue of Daibyaku Renge was delivered to its members in June. The unexpected change from the image of its mimeographed predecessor, Value Creation, a familiar sight to the members, proved a happy surprise to all, but it was Toda who rejoiced over this publication more than anyone else. When an organ publication is beloved and studied by its readers, a marked organizational growth will ensue. In contrast, when the editing of a publication is done merely from force of habit, and people cannot read it or respect it, or with a comfortable feeling, the organization will no longer advance. Based upon his many years of experience, Toda bore this point deep in mind. Opening the cover of the new magazine, readers first encountered Jose Toda's The Philosophy of Life. Opening the cover of the new magazine, readers first encountered Jose Toda's The Philosophy of Life. Reaction varied widely. Some read it superficially, thinking they already knew it through his lectures on the Lotus Sutra. Others eagerly sought to show it to friends that they had been trying to introduce to Nichiren Buddhism. Still others grew ashamed of their shallow knowledge of Buddhism, being initially enchanted by the impression of it all. Just as people's facial expressions differed from person to person, so too did their impressions of the work. No one seemed to realize that this unprecedented philosophical thesis was telling the pure truth for the 21st century, the century of human life. A member of the editorial staff of Toda's publishing company, Shinichi Yamamoto, that's President Ikeda. That's President Ikeda's name in this. A member of the editorial staff of Toda's publishing company, Shinichi Yamamoto, had been in his employ for more than half a year already. He's only a brand new member when this was all going down in Toda's life. Taking home the inaugural issue, President Ikeda saying, when I took home the inaugural issue, I began rereading The Philosophy of Life late at night with all my attention. I'm putting this in the first person now. In the depth of my solitude, intense emotion overwhelmed me. I'm putting it again in first person. This strong impression almost left me dazed, but fatigue crept over me and I laid down on my bed. The room was dark and my head was hot. Unabated excitement deprived me of sleep for a long time. I arose from bed and switched on a desk lamp. I opened my notebook and pondered how to express the night's deep emotions in my own words. Words and phrases of a poem flashed through my mind at random, and my pencil began to glide over the paper. I wrote, "Expectations for youth. Throughout the heavens at dawn, shedding its rays in every way, in glowing brilliance rises the sun. Ah, the deep emotion of the moment. Wondrous life trembles in delight. It is the leaping of a youth's heart. You, youth of the atomic age, the 20th century. What is the use of a mere ideological philosophy? No, you can believe that people can be happy with Who can believe that people can be happy with subterfuge, violence, and material philosophy? No, no. To Nichiren Daishonin's great teachings, which revealed the substance of people's lives and the origin of the great universe, I will devote my life, O youths. Know it if you have wisdom. Know it if you have wisdom. Move if you love mankind with mercy toward perpetual peace, toward Kosen Rufu. Youth, open your eyes. You have the passion and power to advance with great philosophy." He closed his notebook and returned to bed. Soon thereafter, restful breathing could be heard. That night's poem was printed in an inconspicuous corner of the next issue of Daibyaku Renge. Thank you for helping me change my life condition tonight. Thank you for coming back tonight, and I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.